a traveling light. There's one thing that's right wherever I go. That's where I am.
But first, I want to start with that. You were saying that you would like give me a signal and reminded me like comedy clubs. How is it that not every comedy club doesn't just have like a clock?
Some of the new ones.
Some of the new ones do, but how did it take 70 years for like the lighting guy in the back will be like, I'll show you this flashlight. And then you have it at the San Jose Improv one time where they're like, I'll show you a light. But then I get up on stage and the whole sound, the archway around where the sound guy is, it's all like LED lights.
Great.
So then when he shines his light, it just matches all the other lights. So I had no idea.
Is that a new twinkle, or is that part of the original twinkle? Dude, it's so dumb to have the lighting be up to like the host or someone who's in the bar having a cocktail and be like, "Oh, I forgot to start my clock." Like I was in whatever club a couple weekends ago, and they're like, "Hey, the early show can't run long because we had a late show. We need time to." I'm like, "Surely for whatever." Yeah. And I looked at my watch, and I'm like, "They should have lit me by now." And then so I just asked him like, "How are we doing on time?" And then he's like, "I messed up. I think you have about 10 minutes." And I was like, "Okay." And then I was like, if you just had a clock, we wouldn't have to do this.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. I was at Rooster Tea Feathers in Sunnyvale.
Yeah,
been there in May, and the second night. It was the same thing. It was like one show Thursday. Now there's 2 Friday, and she goes, "Hey, 2 shows tonight, so just make sure you don't go over." And there was a weight behind it. And I was like, "Okay."
Yeah.
She's like, "Cause last night you did like an hour 20," and I was like, "What?" And I got out I got on my voice memo thing. Like I record every show, so I was like, says right here I did a tight 50. Like I wish I could do an hour 20.
You did an hour 20.
Yeah, like Chappelle up there. Oh, lost track of time. It's been a couple hours at this point.
Wow. Yeah. To be off by a full 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's man. Thank you. Yeah, you mean the entire show was an hour 20? Like, who are you timing? That's incredible. Yeah. Oh. But if comedy clubs were too organized, I think it would suck a little bit of the fun out of it.
You would lose that.
It would lose a little bit of the je ne sais quoi. If like you just went into a perfectly run comedy club, you're like, what's wrong here? I don't like this. This feels like too clean of an improv.
Yeah. Too sterile. Is is Alexa running this?
You need a little grit in the air. Yeah.
So, The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. That's my introduction. That was a good segue into it. But you said that you were listening to it on the subway on the way here.
Because originally I bought the book. I was really pumped about it because I've always liked Rick Rubin. Yeah. I love that he's worked with everybody and that he looks like a weirdo. He's like a chubby white guy with a beard, and he like started in hip hop in the 80s, and you're like, what? But then he also did metal. And then I've heard a couple clips of him in interviews, even more intrigued. Then he puts out a book on creativity, and it's the pandemic or somewhere around there. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm definitely reading that. And I was reading it, and I enjoyed it. And then I found out he did his own audio book recording and loved it even more. Because just like the clip I talked about, like, he's saying really positive, beautiful things, but in my inner monologue, it's just condescending. Like, it's just like, follow your intuition, but like you hear him say it, and you're like, oh my God, I think I do.
Yeah.
If you wanted to run a scam, he could have my money.
Oh, 100%.
I would join the Rick Rubin cult and just walk around with no socks. Yeah.
It's like he recorded it after spending 6 months in a monastery. Like that's the vibe he gives off. And you're right. It's so like calming, which is, and I discovered the book because I was actually on Audible. I was looking for another book called Creativity, A Short and Cheerful Guide by John Cleese from Monty Python. Yeah. And he also reads that book. But that one's fun because it's just like, it's very short. It's like an hour long, and it's just like listening to a comedian. Right. He's got timing and everything. And then you go to Rick Rubin, and you're like, whoa, I think I just detached from my feelings for the first time.
I feel. Is this what meditation feels like? Yeah. I'm focusing on my breath. I've never focused on my breath before. Yeah, he's very. I think it's funny because I normally find people like that douchey, but I think the reason I don't with him is because I know he loves professional wrestling. So I'm like, oh no, you're white trash like me. Like at some base level, you and I have something in common with the trash arts that is professional wrestling.
Sure,
but you also happen to work with Adele, with
it's
all
insane.
these amazing things. So like, if he even says anything douchey, I always just remember, no. He loves like Southern professional wrestling. Like he's down to earth.
That's
he's
wild.
Yeah, he's
like,
not highbrow.
Yeah, like the same face, same beard and everything. He could be wearing like a stained tank top, and you'd be like, of course.
Yes.
That guy. Like, I'm not going to let that guy in my Uber. But he changes his shirt, puts on some rose-tinted sunglasses, and now he's just the wisest American you've ever heard.
He's the most profound music producer that also doesn't know how to use the board.
Oh, really?
I heard that in an interview. He was on 60 Minutes, and they're in the studio, and they're looking at the board. He goes, I don't know how to do any of this. I have a tech guy that he does this. I just go, and he sits there. I forget what band was in the studio. I don't even think they showed the band. But he's just sitting there, crisscross applesauce, no shoes or socks, just kind of doing this with his bald head and his big beard. And he's like, yeah, I just go in and I listen. And I go, yeah, what'd you think of that? And then he leaves. He just leaves. he leaves like Jeff Singer at Mike's JFL audition that we were talking about. But like, yeah, he's weird, but he's beautiful because he follows none of the rules of like the traditional music producer.
Sure, yeah.
Right.
That reminds me of Steve Jobs, who also would hang out barefoot.
I didn't know
at
that.
Apple. He would wash his feet in the toilet. Yeah, with everything else, like how you see him, like very pristine, same outfit every day. I don't know where that part came from. Wow. He did come off of like the hippie generation, but that's all. I mean, this is all from the Steve Jobs biography. But yeah,
that makes me want to rewatch all those unveilings he did at like Comic-Con, just to see. I want to zoom in on his ankles to see if his jean cuffs are wet from soaking his toes in the commode. Oh, that would be fun to rewatch.
But it's also similar too because it was all about time for him, and so he didn't spend any of his time learning how to like program or any of that. It was just he hired the best engineers or the best designers, and then it would basically just be him and especially when he came back to Apple, it was him and Bill. I'll put it in the audio. I forget his name. This guy, Bill. Okay. That sounds credible.
Not William, dude.
And that
Bill.
guy would make all the mock-ups for like what the iPhone was going to be, what the iPod was going to be, but all these like clay mock-ups. And Steve Jobs would look at him and say, no, we need this. We need fewer buttons. It needs to be smaller. And so he was there to just give that sort of spiritual aesthetic.
He's a visionary.
Paul Rand.
Paul Rand, thank you.
Nickname Bill.
Bill.
He's known as Bill in the office.
Paul quotes Bill Rand was the designer there. Thank you for that. But it's a similar thing.
Very similar. Just like an ideas guy, a visionary, and like a good coach, you know?
Yeah.
Those seem to be the best CEOs. Maybe, Elon Musk should read a Steve Jobs book or a Rick Rubin.
Hey, why don't you hit the brakes? Why don't you dip your feet in the toilet? Take a breath. So one of my favorite parts about this book, he says, they're all very like, it's a very accessible book. You know, we're talking about how it sounds meditative and Zen and everything, but it's also very accessible. The chapters are very short. And there's one called Greatness. It's like 3 minutes long. And he starts it by saying, just talking about the art. He says, if you were alone on a mountain and you had access to, materials to build a house, you would build it how you wanted to. Mm-hmm. Exterior, interior, all the furnishings, everything in there is just for you. And he says that's like a metaphor for what pure art is. Like it's just for you. And this is something that like it changed how I do comedy, how I write comedy. Like for too many years, I wish I would have learned that like 6 months into comedy, because for way too long at the beginning, we've talked about this, when you first start out as a comic, it's this mix of like you don't really know what your comedic presence is. I mean, it takes you like 11 years, and then you're like, oh yeah, it's just me. Right. But it takes that long. Because at first you're like, well, I sort of have to, for me, I was like, I have to do like clever, like Stephen Wright, Mitch Hedberg sort of jokes, because that's what comedians do. I have to pace the stage. I tripped on the mic cord the first open mic I ever did. It was the biggest laugh I got too. It was at the San Jose Improv, and I was like,
stage to trip
comedians pace. Yeah, it's a huge stage.
The theater.
And I didn't know. Like you learn eventually. There's like an unconscious like art to walking and sort of flipping the mic wire up, but I didn't know any of that.
I still don't know.
So I'm just walking around, and got the laugh, and I was like, I guess this is my act now. No.
Right.
I'm the tripping.
I stumble on my words, and then I stumble physically, and that's the big payoff.
So at first you're sort of emulating other people, and some people actually never lose that, which is sad. But like that, when you start, you don't really know. And then from that, it turned into coming up, like writing lots of jokes. What are people going to think is funny?
Yes.
But then the next level is like, no, it's what do I think is funny? And that's like, I think that's where the Venn diagram of like audience and hacks is to me, it's they almost overlap, because like
too much.
Hacky comics work because it works. Like hacky jokes work because they work. That's the point of hacky, is like, oh, this is tried and true from someone else, I'll do it too.
And the audience kind of feels like they've heard this. It feels familiar.
Yeah.
You ever hear a song from a band you've never heard of, but you're like, I've heard this song.
Yes. Yeah,
I haven't heard this song, but I've heard this song.
Yeah. 100%.
and that's why hacky comedy, the Venn diagram you're talking about, I think they almost perfectly overlap. Sure. And there's no middle and there's no outside. Yeah. It's just over. It's like two circles over each other, and it just is hack an audience, and it's all the same color.
It's a full eclipse.
It's a full eclipse.
It eclipses art completely.
You've heard this, and you're gonna like it.
We could also put the cruise ship circle right on that, so it's a triple Venn diagram, single circle.
Yes. There is, man. Did you ever work cruise ships?
Yeah.
I mean, there are those guys that do it, and they do it as real comedians, and then there's those guys that do it where you're like, I think you're more or less cheerleading a drunken room.
Oh, yeah.
And then afterwards, they don't remember a thing you said. You asked a million questions, followed it up with no jokes.
Yeah.
And just kind of pointed at a guy's face. And then
you're
and
like,
there's no good night, everybody.
And I've seen like tricks for how they get the audience going at the end to end with, instead of having like a big clever closer or just ending with their favorite joke. Mm-hmm. Like I've started trying to take the pressure off of myself. Like I'm just gonna end with my favorite joke. Yeah. And if you like me, you'll keep, following me or whatever. But cruise ship, there was one, the craziest one, is because like people, they put in evaluations. Even the staff, they'll put in their evaluation right after a performance, especially if it's a new comic on the ship. There was a guy he was a musical comic, and his last song was called "Stand for the Troops."
He Toby Keithed it.
And so by the end of the song, the whole audience is standing, and that's the end. Thanks, good night. And now it's a built-in standing ovation. Yes. And so now the cruise staff can put that. This guy got a standing. Every night he gets a standing ovation.
A standing ovation. The troops got the standing ovation. He happened to be there leading the chorus line. But that's why hack exists, by the way, is because on a cruise ship, every time I worked a cruise ship, I didn't feel like these sets were for my art. I was just hoping they would book me again because I need to pay my rent.
Right, yeah.
So you're trying to get the good customer service reviews as opposed to, I would slip in some jokes just so I could like look at myself in the mirror in my tiny room. But those were the least artistically fulfilling sets I've ever done, is those 3 years that I spent on a cruise ship. It's like anytime I did one of those weeks, I was like, man, I hope I get booked again because this is like a big chunk of my income.
Yeah. Well, and that's like the siren call of the cruise ships. And I understand, like, I pity those guys because it is very comfortable. And if you're barely doing clubs and then a cruise ship offers you like 4 times the money, then that's what I fell into the same thing of like, art's going to take a back seat because I found that. And that's when I eventually I just had to stop because like my first 12 minutes turned into welcome to the cruise ship. Oh, these cabins are small, like because I knew it would work. Yeah. And I wanted to keep working. And I think there's like danger in the security of that. Rick Rubin talks about that, not in this book, but in another interview that I saw with him, like stuff that pleases everyone. He's like, art has to have it has to be polarizing. Otherwise there's no charge to it.
Right.
And that's to me where the Venn diagram is split for me, and it's totally fine with me now. It wasn't before, but it's fine with me now. Audience here, I'm here, and whatever sliver the overlaps, at least I know that those jokes, even if the audience is like them, they're tried and true. But I also know that I love those jokes. Right? Like I'll throw out a joke if I feel like at this point, if I feel like it's not me, and it used to be like, oh, that'll probably work, rather than to actually think this is funny. There's a comic friend of mine who does a lot of puns, and I sit there and I'm like, I don't believe that you like this. I don't think you think this is funny.
I think you can't stop coming up with them.
Yeah, I think you think you're a clever boy, but there's no way that you're sitting there going, yes.
Yeah, it's I have that fight with myself all the time. The last special I put out, there's a whole bit in there about a bidet that I used in Thailand. And I remember the first time I did it was right after, as it was happening. I was in Thailand on vacation with my wife, and there was stand-up. There's English-speaking stand-up out there. And I hopped on a show, and I told the story, and it crushed. And it just one of those bits that immediately did well, but then I'm like, am I going to be one of those comedians that has a bidet joke? and you know what? There was part of me where I even told Emma, I'm like, this isn't going to be on anything. This is just... But then I like kept doing it, and it kept building. Then I'm like, who invented the bidet? Like some guy had to come up with it, go to Shark Tank with like a crude prototype. And then the joke started like building out from there.
Sure.
And it ended up going on the special, and people really liked it, but it was one that I was conflicted about.
Sure.
And then it won me over, and I'm like, okay, like it's nuanced, and I don't know, sometimes maybe the joke is going to be a fastball down the middle, where you're like, you're not going to miss it, this is exactly what it is.
And I think that's sort of lightning in the bottle. That's something you can take advantage of because at least it still came from a place of like, I think not only do I think this is funny, but this actually happened to me, and that's like, and hacky stuff, unless you're stealing someone else's story, hacky comics can't tell stories. And so like that's, if it came from there, I have a similar one where I have on my last special that I just released, I have a bit about the TSA, and of course, we've all heard airport security jokes from Jerry Seinfeld's, in 1991. But, but in this one, it was because I, the only time I get confrontational with people in public is with the TSA because I don't believe in what they're doing. I'm not doing the bit. I'm just saying this is why.
This is where it came from.
Yeah. I don't. What they're doing, it's an inefficient process. It's incredibly dumb the way that they do it. It's ineffective. It just makes everyone late. And one of the punchlines from the joke is that it was this real story where a guy was like, hey, just leave them alone. They're doing their job. This is another guy in line. And I was like, Oh, it's not their fault. That's what he said.
Yeah.
It's not their fault. They're just doing their job. And I was like, isn't that the definition? Like, it is. I told the guy it's 100% their fault because they chose a job where they knew it meant that they could go through other people's stuff. And in the show, I add hard to root for that guy. And so that's the joke. And that last thing I wish I would have said. But, you know, when you tell the joke, you did say the thing. But I said most of it, at least.
Right.
But the point being, it's a TSA joke, but it's my POV. It's what happened to me.
Right.
And even after the taping, this guy comes up to me and he's like, hey, great set, huh? Oh, TSA, that's fresh ground. And I was like,
whoa, at your special
my
taping?
personal story. I was like, who are you?
Yeah.
He came with a fan. He was one of those, you know how there's always like the fan and then the person who comes with them? Yeah.
Oh,
So,
man.
yeah.
What a crappy thing to say.
Yeah. I was like, thanks.
It's funny when people say, I've had a fan, this one hurt more, I guess, because it was a fan. It wasn't the friend of a fan. But she was like, I forget what city I was in, and I'm paraphrasing, but she pretty much said, I like your comedy because it's just, you come off kind of retarded.
Whoa.
And she's like, nah.
What?
Yeah. And then she's like, but you know what I mean.
You can't backpedal from the R word.
Yeah, and she hit it hard. And I was like, whoa. And then I think I kind of knew what she meant in that I come off without a hard stance in my delivery of things. And I'm like, you could have said that. But I understand it, But I get it. That's after a 2-drink minimum. Maybe you had 3.
Sure.
And I don't know what your level of drinking is. Mine's pretty low. So after 3, I'll get loose-lipped. Probably won't drop the R word, but to each their own. But I remember hearing that and just kind of, because I'm such a people pleaser, I'm like, I get it. Don't worry, you're not. Everything's fine. And then she left, but I remember that was like replaying in my head in the hotel. I'm like, is my comedy dumb? It's like, it is kind of dumb. And then that adds into the negative self-talk that's already in your head. And you're like, it is kind of dumb. And then the tone. You ever have someone say something to you like that quote, and you repeat it in your head and the tone changes?
Oh, yeah.
You're like, kind of dumb. It is kind of dumb. Oh, you are kind of dumb. And then just slowly starts getting
And that's
deeper
what it becomes.
and deeper.
And then it turns into your dad's voice.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I had these 2 girls come up to me after a show. It was like maybe 2 or 3 years in a comedy. I barely started hosting, and they were like college students from San Jose State or whatever. That's where I started doing comedy, was in the Bay Area. They come up to me after the show and they're like, "You were really funny. We weren't sure at first with the whole serial killer vibe." I was like, oh, it's just part of my act. And then I started taping myself, and like, sure enough, when I saw myself, I was uncomfortable because I already have I have naturally very low resting eyebrows. Like they're sort of underneath my, like if you look, that's what eyebrows should look like.
Wow.
See, they're like on the ceiling of my.
Yeah.
But when you hear, it just looks like I'm sort of a little upset all the time.
Yeah.
And so when I come out on stage, now, like for a decade now, like I raise my eyebrows up and I smile just a little, because when I come out, I actually I still don't really look like I'm smiling.
Right.
I just don't look like a murderer. But it's actually very helpful. And like I mentioned that in a story one time, I forget where I was, but I mentioned it at a show, and afterwards people are like, oh, you just need to be yourself. And I was like, no, there's actually, I'm not selling out. I think there's value into knowing how you come across. It's like one of the most valuable things for me off stage has been seeing how I come across, because it's so different than you think. Like anytime that you hear the first time that people hear their voice recorded, like, oh, do I sound like? Yes, you do. Yeah. That is what you sound like. And that's okay.
That's fine.
And also know that just as surprised as you were at your voice, you're going to be just as surprised at your face when you talk to people. So it's okay to be aware of that.
Yes.
So that for people like me, that I don't scare people immediately. Right. That I come out.
That's a really important thing you just said, because everyone's all in to be yourself and you're fine the way you are. And that's true. But also, be open to some modification. Yes. Like raising your eyebrows doesn't mean you're not now being yourself, you know?
No, what it is, and this is why it's still, I think, it's still authentic. It's that now I know how to look how I thought I was looking this whole time.
Exactly. Exactly. Right. Now you're coming across the way you intended to.
100%.
Instead of you're like, I don't know why everyone's upset.
Yeah. I'm just going to stick with the real me.
Eyebrow placement is so important.
Oh, yeah.
I never realized that. I never noticed that your eyebrows were underneath until you pointed out. I'm like,
yeah, and now it's all you can see. And now that's why I keep them up like this. And it doesn't look like I'm raising my eyebrows.
Right.
I just look like a normal person.
I remember that was a note that I got. I did an acting class once. It was for like commercial acting. I was in my early 20s. And they were like, high energy. And I was like, okay. And then I did the first take, and she was like, higher energy. And I did the second take, and she's like, all right, I think all you did was raise your eyebrows. You didn't come off happier. You just went from hello to hello. She said, it is off-putting. So I was like, wow. Which, that's hard to hear at 21. You're not going to take that well. You know, you don't even know yourself. And you're like, 100%. Great, I'm coming off upsetting.
Organically, I'm not energetic, and I was so glad. There's value in learning how to host comedy shows, but I was never a great host. Aside from sort of learning how to like shine the tools of crowd work and deal with things like that you sometimes have to as a host. I was never like, anytime that I tried to be, I looked like I was auditioning to be a game show host. Unlike
just a great posture,
cable TV,
From Auburn, huh?
I can't hear you. Okay.
The headliner's back there going, geez, just bring me out.
So I do think there's value to that and to like knowing how you present yourself, but I'm not advocating like changing jokes or anything. I think they're two very different things. And the other thing that I love about that, and also like I read this book or listened to this book, Filter World, that now also affected how I do like social media, which is that I was mostly doing this anyway, where I just post stand up. I don't do any like sketches or like, you know,
in front of the camera stuff.
Stitch oncoming, or I think it's fine promoting a show or whatever. Here's an update about my life to keep, if you want to keep your followers engaged. But if you're doing something because it's trending well, then that is not the house that you would build by yourself on a mountain, right? That is like, it's a house you're building because you saw all these other ones, and all these other houses got a lot of likes.
So I'm gonna try.
I'm gonna try and do that. Yeah. And so it's like freeing to just like I'll just post stand up, and if people like it, they like it. If they don't, they don't. But I'm not gonna change that just to go after a few more. I even now like I used to even put things in the caption of like, you know, if the joke was about penguins, I had an old penguin joke. If I would have something dumb like, what's your favorite animal? You know, just to get people in those comments. Like, that's not something I ever would have done. Like, that's what I want people to imagine. Like, if Instagram did not exist, but someone was like, if social media didn't exist, and someone was like, hey, here's a camera. It's 9:16 for some reason. Like you've seen movies the other way your whole life. It's gonna be this way. Just make some stuff. What would that stuff look like? And to me, that would be that house. It would be nothing that you see now. It wouldn't be any sort of like dance that you've seen 1,000 times before.
Redone sketches.
It would just be what you think, you know, is good or funny or passion or whatever, you know, your art is. And so it's, for me, it's taken, like I said, it's taken the weight off of a lot of that social media sort of pressure where you're like, you got to do that. You got to post every day. It has to have a call to action. You have to start with a great hook. It's like, how about I just show you my jokes.
Yeah, that work in front of people.
And if you like them, I don't even care if you comment. Just come to a show. Like that's my end goal. Yeah. Like I don't even engage in comments because that's another thing. They would say like you gotta within the first 30 minutes that you post, you gotta interact with all those people. But you and I have talked about that. Like I can't handle comments anymore.
No, I get angry and I started looking up their families. And I'm like, because my goal is to just have a good comment back. But it's hard for me. It's hard. Usually I don't have the good comment back. It just comes off, I'll kill you. You know, like it's very straightforward. But I did have one good one. I made fun of alpha males, and that video just keeps getting comments, and it upsets people that do jujitsu, I guess. I don't know. And there's one guy who had BJJ in his handle, so he's into Brazilian jiu-jitsu. He's like, this is supposed to be funny. And I always hate those comments because there's a video of people laughing at the joke. Full comedy club. Everyone seems to be enthralled.
100%. Yeah.
But this one, you know, I feel like my buddy Dustin posts about that all the time. But underneath I wrote, it's only funny if your soul isn't locked in a Kimura. And which I was really proud of that comment. And the best part is he responded and wrote fair enough, and I'm like, that's all I ever want from this.
That's it.
That's all I ever want from this. If you're gonna come in with that and I get you with a little zing because I did a homework on your thing and I looked at your profile and I slipped in some of your verbiage, just go fair enough, and then we move on with our lives. You know, you don't choke me out when I come to your town. Yeah, I don't like the comments either. But yeah, it's all Rick Rubin's book. It's a lot of find what you like, work on that, finish the project.
Yes,
which is a big aspect because
once
you finish the project, it leads to the next one and the next one and the next one.
Yeah,
and because that's one of the clips I was listening to on the way. Sorry if I.
No. I'm dovetailing into what you're saying.
Yeah, but it's so easy to follow. And it's like everything that you get caught up on, he says, that's great. Do you get distracted? That's great to get distracted. That's sometimes where the best work comes in.
Yeah.
Doing something else and going, oh yeah, that relates to this. Now I can go do that.
Yeah.
And it's simple. And I don't know if you felt this way listening to this book or reading this book, but I was already doing quite a few of the things that he talked about.
That might be one of the reasons why I liked it so much.
Yeah,
I was
like, just reaffirming.
I guess I'm wise too.
I'm not lazy. I'm an artist. That's it.
That was validating.
It was there was parts of it that were validating and encouraging, and then there were parts in it that were new for me, but like the not worrying about the audience. This idea that the audience comes last is such a beautiful statement.
I love that. He says, in terms of priority, inspiration comes first. And that's a fun chapter too, where he talks about how like you can't create inspiration, but when it comes, be grateful for it, write it out. But then also work when you're not inspired. Just do the work. So inspiration comes first. You come second. The audience comes last. And I love that he doesn't say third.
Right.
Because for sure there's a list. Audience, he's saying it means nothing.
Right.
Like you do not do art for the outcome.
Yes.
And look, I know calling stand-up comedy art, there's going to be a lot of...
I fight that all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
But whatever... For our conversation, I'm going to call it that.
Yeah.
Because at least, like, if it's coming from me, I'd like to call it that.
Yeah. No, I like calling it art too. It's my own negative self-talk. Like when I do the bidet joke, or when I did, I was like, "Am I doing art?" But then I'll watch guys, I'll watch comics where I'm like, "That guy, that's art." You know, and then there are certain jokes I have. Well, I'll give myself credit. I'm like, that felt like art. I don't know, that felt like something. But that's why I fight with it, because like we were talking about with the hacks and the it's hard to call that art. But I guess theoretically it is, and we just don't have another term for what we do.
For a hack, though, it's like coloring book art.
Yes. Yeah, that's true.
So they found the thing that works, and they're just like, I'm going to make mine blue-green instead of green.
Right.
And that's their twist on a joke that already works. Yeah. But David Bowie also says, he goes, I think it's terribly dangerous for an artist to fulfill other people's expectations. I love that. He says people generally produce their worst work when they do that. And if there's
trying to recreate something.
Yeah. And if there's a guy who like threw rules out the window and just did what he wanted to do, like purple, like a green bolt of lightning across his face. Like I'm sure if you like crowd tested that, people would be like, "That's weird, man."
But he's stuck with it.
But now it's like a Halloween costume, Yeah, because it was his house on a mountain.
Yeah, he said, what was the other quote? I believe it's in this book, or maybe it was in an interview, but he said, the audience only knows what they've heard before.
Oh, yes.
Isn't that a killer quote?
Yes.
Like, they don't know what they like, they just know what they've heard before, that they've enjoyed. So don't worry about them. Just throw it out there. They might like it. And if they don't, whatever. You liked it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's this great book. Well, it's just on Audible. It's called An Oral History of the Office. And this like office nerd journalist interviewed everyone who ever worked on The Office, from the prop guy to Steve Carell. And he put together this amazing history of The Office. And that's one of the things he talks about, is he said that I believe that it was... not Michael Schur, but the other guy responsible for bringing The Office to the United States. And it wasn't testing well when they first... can you imagine that? Like the greatest sitcom of the 2000s didn't test well? But it's this very thing that you're talking about that he brings up. People only know what they've seen before. So when they've seen something that they haven't, and now they're asked to evaluate, like the easy thing to do, and I hate this, is when people say, like, when I ask them, so what'd you think of Inside Out 2? Oh, it was better than the first Inside Out. It's like, you haven't told me anything.
Right.
You've done the easy thing of comparing it to another thing that you know of.
Right.
But what did you like about it? What didn't you? What are the ideas from it that struck you? And so Michael Schur, whose name I'll probably replace because I don't think it was him.
His name's Bill. Bill Schur.
Bill Schur. Greg Daniels. Thank you. Yes.
Good work, Mike.
All right. Michael Schur, a.k.a. Greg Daniels. So he calls... everyone's name is blanking on me. Now I know I can go to you. Who's the guy who created... Why am I blanking on the guy who created the British Office?
Ricky Gervais?
Ricky Gervais, yeah.
Okay.
Ricky Gervais. So he calls up Ricky Gervais and he says, we're not testing well. And Ricky Gervais says, true story... When we first, when The Office was first, when we first screened The Office for a test audience for the BBC, it scored just above women's bowling.
It's just how sexist we are,
right?
Because it shouldn't score like women's, but we know we're just a sexist society. Right. We're like, it's
I'm just quoting him.
Women's
Apparently, people don't watch it. When was the last time you watched it?
I don't watch any bowl.
No, right? And he said, so we got all these notes back from the BBC, and we didn't change a thing. And that's what he said.
Right.
He said, people don't know what to think about what's unfamiliar at first. And so, yeah, that's what I love about that idea.
And then now, how many shows came after that? That same format of that mockumentary kind of style with the confessionals and all that. And that also circles back to our conversation about hacks. Because Ricky Gervais was able to ignore those notes at the time because he was still an established powerhouse. Back then. So if he was like a newer comic with a newer show, he might not have had the power to go, we're ignoring all those notes.
Yeah.
It might have gotten completely changed and made into a show whose style had been seen 1,000 times and not be groundbreaking.
Right.
Yeah, so it really goes to show like the struggle to be a true artist. You first have to get really successful. It seems like you have to get really successful so you can have the power to say no to people that are the gatekeepers of our world.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I would say, especially if you're working on big projects like that. And that is the nice thing about social media is it's given us a little more control. But then it also becomes too overwhelming for me.
Well, yeah, because then people see what works and then they want to mimic that.
Yeah.
How many hair metal bands came out because Motley Crue crushed it?
Right.
You know, like there's so many hair metal bands. Like bands, I go to record stores sometimes, go through the metal section, and they'll just be random men in makeup with big hair with a band that I thought I followed the genre.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, who is this? Who are they? Where do they work now? What do they do? Man?
So that's another thing that I like too that he talks about is like there's a difference between emulating something or just being inspired by what this other entity caused. So like all these hair metal bands, they saw Motley Crue, they're like, we're going to be our own Motley Crue, but we'll write our own song, but we're going to dress like that hair and we'll sound similar. Like that's what happens. What I love is he gives a great example in the book of how Paul McCartney, he listened to the album Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys, and he cried when he heard the song God Only Knows. And at that point, he said it was the best song he had ever heard, which is a crazy compliment.
Right.
Especially if you've heard the song. But I mean, it's fine, but I wouldn't put it in like top 40.
Right.
But for Paul McCartney, that's what matters. That for Paul McCartney, he thought this album was incredible. It was transcendent. And so Rick Rubin says that the Beatles producer George Martin said, without Pet Sounds, Sgt. Pepper wouldn't have happened. And Paul McCartney is the one who spearheaded Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and that it was in response to it, like appreciating this art, and it wasn't, we're going to make our own Pet Sounds. Can you imagine how insane that would be if the Beatles, they're growing artistically as a band, and then their next song is like, dot bop boo bop bop ba dee.
You see that so much, though.
Oh, yeah.
But it's good that they didn't do that.
No.
Yeah.
What he did, though, is he was like, I want to make one that makes people, I want to make an album that makes people feel as moved as I was when I heard Pet Sounds. Bill Watterson says the same thing about Charlie Brown. He says, I never copied Charlie Brown. What I took from Charlie Brown is it was the only comic I had ever read where they were talking about like deep, like adult psychological issues.
Right.
And that you can do that with kids.
Yeah.
But if you compare the two, I mean, Charlie Brown's super boring. I can't stand it. But Calvin and Hobbes, that's what he took from it.
Right.
He wasn't like, I'm going to draw my own sort of Snoopy.
Right.
You know, I'm going to draw my own, I'm going to create my own version of Charlie Brown. It was, I'm going to do my own thing, but with this level that I didn't know was possible until I read Charlie Brown.
I love that he points that out. Because like one of the things I felt like from reading his book is like it empowered me to like have inspirations outside of other comedians. Because I think that's important.
Absolutely.
It's like when I was doing the last few years, I think like the three people that I've been into a lot is Rick Rubin's kind of wacky ideals and hippy dippy kind of personality. John Hughes, because the feeling that you have at the end, or the feeling I have at the end of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, which he and I quote way too much.
Sure.
But that feeling of like it made you laugh, made you cry a little, and then made you laugh harder. And at the end, I just like the way I feel when his movies are done.
Sure.
Like I feel like happy but warm, kind of like I just spent time with my family. And then Charles Bukowski, which is a way offshoot because he has these juicy little lines. That's the thing I take away from him.
Sure.
He has lines that I like to repeat and reread. Not because I didn't understand him, just because I like the way he said it. And those three things, I tried in a weird way to, whether it's feeling or ideology or just simplicity, try to jam into my comedy. Not like shoehorn in, but I think about it a lot. And instead of having other comedians as my inspiration.
Yes.
Because then I feel like sometimes you overlap on ideas, delivery, different things like that, and then you kind of are replicating yourself.
100%.
Yeah.
And that's what I did early on when I was trying to write Stephen Wright jokes. I also just delivered them deadpan,
Right.
like Stephen, not doing an impression, but it wasn't how I would talk.
Right.
Yeah, and it was because of that. I love that. I love that indirect inspiration. I actually went back to. I inadvertently found inspiration in poetry, which sounds kind of douchey, but I went back to school online for a few months there when I was doing cruise ships.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I might as well do something productive while I'm flushing my art down this tiny toilet.
And paying $15 a day for Wi-Fi. Might as well get a degree.
True story. One of the reasons, or the main reason why I didn't work cruise ships anymore, it's not just because I wanted to improve my art, but it was also because I made a joke on a ship where I said, being a comic on a cruise ship is great. It's you work like 20 minutes a night, just like the Wi-Fi on this boat.
You took a dump on the
Yeah, and they destroyed. And afterwards, the staff was like, "You can't say that.
You can't make fun of the Wi-Fi."
And I was like, "Well, that's my art." And then no more cruises.
That's what ended it?
I think so, because I didn't get a single call after that.
What cruise line were you working?
I was mostly doing Royal. They
That was the one I
were
worked.
good
Yeah,
ships.
They were the ones that asked the least of you, and they paid the same as the other one.
Oh yeah, and you can stay in a regular
you
cabin.
didn't
You
have to wear
can
a
walk
name tag.
around.
Oh,
Yeah,
I love that we're reminiscing about a job that we hated, but we had the best cruise line.
At the time, it really was.
Because I would talk to other comedians that worked all of them, and they would be like, "Oh, Royal's the best. You
Yeah.
barely have to do anything, and they pay you the same, and they treat you like a human."
Yeah.
And I was like, "I still hate it." And they're like, "We do too." But imagine if you were on some of the other ones, you'd
Sure.
hate yourself. But
So I started taking these online classes, and
Yeah.
one of them, I went back to an English degree, and I took a poetry class, and it just sort of leveled up my comedy because it helped me appreciate free form poetry, which I thought I hated, because there's no to me, when there are limitations in art, it can make art better, because if you have to work within these constraints, this canvas is only this big, I only have this palette, what can I make with these limited resources? And it's the same with like a comedy. I love the fact that it's so minimal. It's just all I need is a microphone, and you and I have both done shows where the mic went out.
Yeah.
And then it's just you, like Greek style,
and an empathy.
just proclaiming your jokes to the crowd.
That is what you do when the mic goes out.
So I love that. I love the limitation there, but. So I thought that freeform poetry was just like, you can do whatever you want, but it's not, because I learned to appreciate a good kind, even if it doesn't rhyme, or even if it's not, iambic pentameter or whatever rules are set up for it. If you are doing freeform, it's keeping the imagery original, concise, layered, and concrete. And that was one of the biggest things, was making things concrete. So instead of just saying, my love for you, it's endless and it's ongoing and it's forever, just all sort of these abstract words, it's saying like, my love for you is, it's as hard as, I'm trying to come up with something shocking.
Like a subway hitting a homeless man on the tracks.
Yes.
It is sudden, brutal, and shocking.
This person, great comedy. But those concrete images, so that's what, in a huge nutshell, coming back to what you were saying about like what you're inspired by. Like, it would be even more douchey if I was like, who inspired me? Proust.
Just start naming painters.
Shakespeare. A dash of, Van Gogh.
Gandhi and Jesus. I don't know. That's who I look to. I look to the Lord.
Jane Austen. The Lord.
How would Jesus approach this tag? But no, I think that's great, because it sounds like free form poetry is much like stand up in the minimalist.
Yeah, and that most of it is bad.
So it's more like improv.
But There's some Instagram bait.
Yeah, there we go.
Likes.
Like, comment, subscribe, tag your favorite improviser / realtor.
Is it real comedy? Answer below. But it's a couple more things before we get out of here. Speaking of Paul McCartney, so here's another example that he touched on that I thought was funny. It doesn't really have to do with like anything that we do, but I thought it was funny. He devotes a chapter on sort of debunking not just inspiration, but retroactively applying how you got your inspiration. It's like winner's bias. Like Paul McCartney could say, when people ask him, how do you write your songs? He can say, well, I dreamed yesterday. And it's like, yeah, sure. you have a number one song, and you can say, and maybe he did. Maybe he did dream all of it. Maybe he dreamt a line, but he can simply say, I dreamt it. And all of us are like, what? But he's also not telling us like the 23 crappy songs he had dreams about. It's not something like a formula you can apply to your life.
Right.
Yeah, just dream music.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I quit music. And so it's easy to say that, and Rick Rubin talks about that. I wish I had a direct quote, but he talks about bands that he worked with, and he doesn't name them, but he'll talk about people who say that certain things happen, but he's like, embrace the fact that we don't really know.
Right.
And I love that. I love analyzing comedy, but I also like to say, maybe that's why my bike lock joke worked, but maybe that's why my bike lock joke worked, but I don't know.
Right.
You know, like, and that joke, like, I should just tell that story from now. The truth behind that story is that was whatever the 11th iteration of that joke. And now it's like, at this point, it's like my most viral joke or whatever. But from now on, I think when people ask me about it, I'm just going to be like, I mean, I came up with it while I was performing on Conan. That's...
That guy JP Buck really let you do what you wanted on that show. So that was riffing new material.
The booker's like, I trust your instincts. Not gonna approve anything. Just
go buck wild. Sorry, puns.
And Rick Rubin, to me,
pun. I just realized after I just said his name again. That's how bad I am at puns that I think repurposing a guy's last name as a verb is. I don't even know if that was a verb. To be quite honest with you, I'm falling apart here. But yeah. You should tell him you dreamt it, is my point.
Yeah. Oh, what was I going to say? I had one more. Oh, and Rick Rubin to me is like, he's such a great example of this too, of pushing that winner's bias aside, because in this book, he never says, even though he could have, he doesn't start out the book by saying like, so I'm Rick Rubin, I put Red Hot Chili Peppers on the map, also Beastie Boys, LL Cool J, Rage Against the Machine, Adele, worked with Metallica, and here's how you can too, right? It's not.
It's not.
He doesn't name anyone. And for me, it was actually just a little bit disappointing if I didn't love the book so much, because I was looking forward to maybe some stories from him in the studio, which he for sure has more than arguably anyone in history, as far as like the range of genres that he has worked in. But he doesn't say any of that. He doesn't say, here's how you do it. He just says, maybe here's why you do it. You know?
Yeah, it's all. None of the book is about him.
No,
and none of the book is about his work, and it's all like, and it's almost a book of no rules. If you think about it, quit boxing yourself in. I have that conversation with people. Sometimes, especially when someone goes to a comedy class, they have these like hard, rigid rules about stand-up. And I think that's important in the beginning, because I feel like you should learn the basics before you get all weird out there. But at the same time, you get to a point, and sometimes you can break rules. You can break a bunch of rules. Watch any musicians, watch fighters. Like, oh, he broke his stance. Yeah, well, his feet are really quick, so he can overcome breaking his stance, and it doesn't lead to him getting hurt. There's always, like, and that's what the whole book was to me, ways to break maybe societal rules on what work and crafting something should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he talks about bands like the Ramones who they were so sort of green at being a band that they didn't know enough about the rules to know they were breaking rules.
Yes.
They were just making songs.
There's beauty in ignorance.
Yeah.
There's like real stupid confidence in ignorance too.
Sure.
Like
is that maybe that's what that woman was trying to tell you?
You have stupid, ignorant confidence to say what you say out there.
It is beautiful.
Yeah.
It is transcendent.
When you talk, it sounds like you're learning for the first time. You're like, oh, thank you. Oh, you can stop buttering my biscuits now. I got to go lay down. Oh, dear. But yeah, it's do as you will. It's a book on philosophy, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hard end.
No, I think that last thing, that was a good
That's a clip right there.
laugh. Yeah.
Clip it. Add it. Edit
So
it.
where are we at time-wise? 57. Okay. Yeah, we're right there. Let me see if there are any other quotes I wanted to throw in. But this has been super fun, man. Yeah.
This was fun when we did it on I think we did the Bukowski book.
Yeah, we did.
Post office.
Yeah. But man, I wish more in-person stuff is always just...
It's always better.
So much.
Yeah, over Zoom.
Because now I can see your face as I interrupt you in 3D.
Watch me go. You got it. I did that to you too, though. Hey, that's part of podcasts. You know,
we're breaking the rules of conversation.
Yes,
it's talking over each other.
It's not about listening. It's about waiting for your turn. That's what conversation's all about.
Get out of the box of manners.
Which, by the way, you haven't done. But people pleasing.
Yeah, I think we have a couple really strong places to end it. But
for sure.
I'll throw this in there somewhere, and I'll plug your podcast and everything too. And isn't this going to be like a crossover event?
Yeah, I don't mind posting it. We'll leave this part in. I don't mind posting this on my YouTube channel. This would be a great for when I don't make a This Week in Zoltan. This is excellent. Yeah, no, I'll definitely post this conversation. Yeah.
And then you can just in post, you can just put
I'll just
This Week in Zoltan.
The book pile with Kellen.
The Zoltan pile. You can just sort of put your
Zoltan.
name on
I think I'll just impose my face within your artwork. Those books up there will just be little pictures of my head, and I'll be like, no, this is a crossover episode. Everyone's a part of it. Do you want me to close it out?
Oh yeah, for your stuff, go for it. I'll do all mine later.
Perfect.
In audio.
Yeah, that's been the episode This Week in Zoltan, connected with the book pile with Kellen Erskine.
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 It's Erskine.
That's how good of friends we are. I can't pronounce his last name. See you guys next week. Thanks for listening.
Trekking heavy or traveling light, there's one thing that's right wherever I go. That's where I